Hi, we're back. It's Liz, Harper, and Sarah Light with the virtual soil health mob. Today we have Jessica. Jessica, do you mind introducing yourself and telling the audience what biogeochemistry, soil biogeochemistry is?
All right. Hi, my name's Jessica Chiartas. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of California, Davis, studying soils and biogeochemistry, to your point there. Um, uh, my research focuses on the long-term impacts of agriculture on soil carbon and overall soil health. And I guess to just dive in a little bit to what soil and biogeochemistry is, it's really a systems-based science that looks at the interactions of the biological, chemical, physical, and geological processes on Earth, which lends itself really nicely to soil because soil is the interface of the hydrosphere, atmosphere, lithosphere, and biosphere. So the water, air, mineral, and organic phase of things. And so when we think about soil health, we're really thinking about not just the physical properties of soil that maybe we understood in the early days of agriculture, or the chemical aspects that we started to learn as we became more innovative and technologically advanced, or even just the biological that is kind of this emerging novel field that people are getting really excited about. But it's integrating those three things, the biological, chemical, and the physical, and the emergent properties that arise out of those gives rise to what we are now calling soil health. And so soil and biogeochemistry really looks at broad scale elemental cycles like the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and how these things interact with living things, and how these elements are integrated into living things, and how those cycles drive ecosystem functions across our landscapes.
That's so awesome. So we're all becoming more aware of soil carbon, soil microbiology. Based on your research in ag management systems, what information would you share with farmers and ranchers about soil carbon, soil microbes, managing them?
Yeah, well, I nerd out on this stuff, so there's probably lots of things I would like to share. But I guess my favorite things to focus on are just really thinking about soil as a habitat, as an ecosystem where organisms are living. So again, it's this nexus of air, water, mineral, and organic materials coming together, and the way that those mineral and organic components aggregate together builds this structure we call soil structure that really creates the home that microbes and other organisms are living in. It creates this pore space, this pore structure that air and water flows through, that nutrients flow through, that organisms can move around in. And when we really start to think about our soils as a habitat and as an ecosystem, and think about this structure as informing that environment, you can start to think about how that environment feeds back into these living things. And you know, if you, for instance, don't have a lot of pore space and things get waterlogged, you know, it may not be the healthiest environment to maximize the potential of the life in your soil. And so one, I guess, is just really the importance of soil structure and the importance of building soil organic matter, because whether you have a sandy soil or a clayey soil, adding more organic matter is going to either, from the sand perspective, help with aggregation, and go from having just these big macro-sized pores where water just flushes right through, to now having some more of these micro pores, areas that can hold on to water a little bit better. And on the flip side, from the clayey side, if you're building your organic matter, you're helping opening things up, creating more pore space that air can flow through, that your roots can be healthier, that your microbes can be healthier. So from one point, it's thinking about building organic matter to help build that structure, but also providing food source and habitat for your organisms. And when we really, as people are getting more interested in building organic matter, both to mitigate climate change and to build resilience on farm for all these other functions it provides, like increased infiltration or water holding capacity, buffering capacity, things like that, that we really need to think about, well, if we want to build more organic matter, we need to understand what organic matter is and what it takes to, what the dynamics are in a soil that would either lead to the promotion of organic matter building up, or that could lead to the loss. And so one of the coolest things I've learned in recent years is that, and I think the scientific community at large, is that organic matter is really just 50 to 70% dead microbial bodies. And so if you want to build organic matter, you need to build microbes. And if you want to build microbes, you need to really understand what microbes are made out of. And they're not just carbon, and organic matter is not just carbon. It's a broad suite of nutrients that are important to plant nutrition as well, but also important for microbes to build their bodies. And if they only have carbon, they may not be able to actually grow their bodies, which later become organic matter. They actually need a certain ratio of carbon to nitrogen to phosphorus to sulfur, as well as a lot of other micronutrients for enzymes they maybe produce or other parts of their functioning that are important. And so really thinking about soil organic matter as this, really thinking about soil microbes as these living things that have requirements just like you or I do, whether that's nutritional requirements or whether that's air or water, and thinking about soils as this home that, depending on how well structured that home is, it's going to feed back onto the physiology or the health of your resident microbes. And since we're also starting to learn so much more about how microbes play roles in both making nutrients more available for plants to take up, things like pest resistance. There's been some really cool research out of Davis, out of the Gaudin lab, that's shown that the microbes actually play a really crucial role in plants being able to produce the compounds that they need to resist pests. And so, yeah, just really, I think shifting the perspective to a more holistic ecosystem-based perspective of soil, and really thinking about things in terms of efficiency and microbial physiology. And if we can maximize the microbial physiology, we can maximize the efficiency at which things like carbon are stored.
That's so awesome. I love really that tie together of structure, fertility, and soil biology. So thank you for that. In agronomy, we have some models around soil tests and what that means for plant nutrition and plant fertility. But some of the measurements for soil health have been a little bit more elusive to really bring down into that on-farm scale in a tangible way that producers can use. What soil health measurements do you find to be most useful for growers who really want to quantify changes in soil health on their farm? And what emerging technologies do you know of that might be coming down the pipeline and available soon that would be useful for producers and for people who really want to get that tangible next step?
Sure, that's a great question, because obviously lab analyses can be costly, and we want to make sure that those measurements that growers are potentially paying for are really going to be useful and meaningful on the farm, and also that they're going to be sensitive to management, so that we're not just measuring things that are too difficult to perceive under different practices. I'd say that, there's a lot of work being done by the Soil Health Institute, by Cornell, to kind of come up with minimum viable data sets, or NRCS has done a lot of work as well to kind of zero in on the best indicators. And there's a broad suite, something up to like 21 different metrics that you could be looking at potentially. But to your point, if I were to zero in on the ones that I think are the most useful, obviously that may vary from place to place. And so what I'm going to say is a bit of a generalization, but you could consult some of those other resources if you want to see what the full suite or full gamut is, and maybe choose things that are really context specific for you. Like in some regions, salinity might be really important to think about in terms of soil health. But the things I find universally that are really helpful are things like POC, or active available carbon. It's been shown to be a good short-term indicator of long-term sequestration of carbon. It's kind of, you can think of it as like the carbon that's available for microbes to eat. It's a bit of a newer way of looking at, I guess it's still a chemical way of looking at the biology, but it just gives you a good indicator of your soil carbon and whether or not you're increasing your organic matter over time, as well as whether there's enough food available for your microbes. Similarly, there's an indicator that folks are using called the ACE protein index, that kind of gives you the total available or organic nitrogen or protein that's in your soil. That also can kind of be an indicator of what's available for microbes to have access to. And then the third one that folks are really looking at, I guess to that end, is respiration. So like, how active are your microbes? If you, at a given amount of carbon food source, how much of that how much microbes do you have to actually eat that? And how much are they respiring? It's kind of a backwards way of thinking sometimes when we're thinking about building soil organic matter. You know, we don't think we want to have CO2 being produced because, you know, CO2 is a greenhouse gas and that can be contributing to climate change. But in reality, like I said before, in order to build organic matter, you need to build your microbes. And if you want to build up your microbial population, you're going to be increasing CO2 production because you have more microbes there, more active. Just like if you had 10 people in a room versus 100 people in a room, right, there's going to be more CO2 produced. And so what's really a really great metric too, and this one gets a little bit more expensive, but being able to look at microbial biomass, again, it's a really great short-term indicator of long-term soil carbon sequestration, but it also builds on that and tells you, like, this is how much microbes we have in our soil. And then if you can take that microbial biomass and look at it relative to your respiration rate, you can say, how much is my community respiring based on how many people or how many microbes I have there. So I'd say those are some really good lab analyses that folks can use to measure their soil health. But in terms of like in the field, simple indicators, smelling it, looking at the color, is the color improving over time? Does it smell rich and earthy, or does it kind of smell putrid and like there's some funky gases being produced? I think things like aggregate stability are hugely important, just in terms of how well is your soil going to hold up in a rain event or after an irrigation, and you know, are you going to get aggregates falling apart and pores clogging, and then you're eventually going to have water running off your landscape rather than infiltrating in and being able to use that water later. And there's very simple rudimentary ways of looking at that. You can literally take aggregates from different fields and drop them in a thing of water and watch how fast they fall apart very qualitatively. There's also an app on the smartphones now called Slakes that you can actually get a more quantitative metric of your aggregate stability. And then the other thing I'd say in terms of like in-field indicators, we often will take rings out there and drill them into the ground and measure infiltration rate by pouring water on. But, as a grower, just observing your field during a rain or an irrigation event, is water infiltrating or is it running off? I think there's a lot that can be observed just by being kind of a land listener or a land doctor, as they say, and using your senses to really observe whether your soil is continually improving. You can visually observe the structure, grab a shovel and dig a little hole and actually get up close and personal and examine your soil. And then of course, observing your plants, because they're gonna be showing signs if your soil is not very healthy. In terms of like future technologies, there is a lot of interest obviously in soil carbon markets and things like that. And it gets costly to measure soil carbon. And like I said, it's also challenging to pick up the change over time. That's why some of these short-term indicators like the epoxy or the microbial biomass can be nice, because it often takes like 5 to 10 years to really see changes in soil carbon, and in some soils could take even longer. And so there's challenges with monitoring that. It can be costly and it takes a lot of time and labor. But there's a lot of folks who are working on tools like Yale has a little handheld colorimeter called the Quick Carbon tool that they're hoping to get out there one day. That would be a really cost-effective tool. maybe even in the future, it could be a little sensor on your smartphone that can give you an indication of soil carbon based on color. And that can get challenging if you're trying to compare, you know, a soil in California to a soil in the Midwest. But if you're trying to on-site measure continual improvement over time, and you see that the colors are getting darker, then it tends to indicate that maybe you're increasing your organic matter, because likely the mineralogy is not changing, right? So that's one that could be really cost-effective handheld tool. The other thing that people are really looking at is things like remote sensing. That creates some challenges, and that's a conversation that I think we need to have better with the farming community, because, you know, there's privacy issues and all of that, but we do have satellites constantly circulating the globe, and that imagery could be useful data for indicating all kinds of landscape level changes.
It's so incredibly fascinating. Just everything that you shared, and it is all about the microbes as we're learning. And every time we have a conversation around soil health, I learn something new, and it just is like a little puzzle piece that like fits together and into my broader knowledge of soil health. And it's just always just so fascinating. Okay, so where can farmers and ranchers access more of your work, and any additional resources for us to take away?
Yeah, so I didn't mention, but you know, part of, I guess, my background in the research that I'm working on at Davis, like I said, is looking at long-term impacts of ag on soil carbon and soil health. And so the first project I was fortunate to work on was at the long-term ag research station there in Davis, called Russell Ranch, where they're hosting the Century Experiment, which is intended to be a 100-year experiment. It's in its 27th year now. And I was able to look at the change in carbon from 1993 to 2012, where we found, looking at systems that were organically managed and received compost and cover crop versus a more hybrid system that was conventionally managed but had a cover crop, versus just a conventionally managed all corn tomato systems. We also had a series of wheat and fallow systems, but didn't see as much significant changes in those. Whereas in the organic conventional hybrid system, we did see that in the surface, both the organic and the hybrid, so both cover crop systems, increased in soil carbon. They had improvements in infiltration and aggregate stability. Even the organic system had better yield stability even over the years. All of this information can be found on the Agricultural Sustainability Institute's website through UC Davis. And there's a specific page focused on the Century Experiment that kind of brings together and synthesizes all the results that have been found out there, in addition to the work that I've done. Just to kind of expand on the rest of that research, we did find that if you looked a little bit deeper, which folks often don't do in soil carbon research, although we're realizing it's important, especially as we start thinking about economic incentives for mitigating climate change. When we looked down to 2 meters deep, we found that the hybrid system actually lost carbon at depth, and that the organic system significantly increased across the entire 2-meter profile. And that's relevant because, back to that, what I was saying about these ratio of nutrients that microbes need, we can't say for sure, but we do think that maybe there's something going on there, that there was a nutrient that was lacking in that hybrid system that didn't allow the microbes to take the carbon coming in from those deep roots and, you know, having cover year round, and convert that into biomass that became future organic matter, whereas maybe that compost was able to overcome some barriers. So whether you're using compost or synthetic fertilizers, really thinking about those ratio of nutrients and making sure that it's a balance that's good for your microbial population. So yeah, definitely the Agricultural Sustainability Institute has a lot of really good, relevant long-term research collated there that's relevant to California farmers. Also, you know, there's the RCDs, NRCS. There's hopefully in the near future we'll have a website coming for the California Farm Demonstration Network. But there's all these great technical assistance providers doing work on the ground that have websites that have resources. UCA&R has really great resources, especially their IPM, Integrated Pest Management website. It's super easy to navigate and access information. The Community Alliance with Family Farmers has a lot of really great information, especially on climate smart agriculture and ways to build your resilience as our climate here changes in California. And again, this is kind of a teaser for the near future, but I was fortunate to receive funding through NRCS to build a website called Soil Life. And we are currently on Instagram and Facebook. On Instagram, it's at soil.life, and on Facebook, it's at the Soil Life. And we've been putting together a lot of graphics for a really simple, easy to digest graphics-based introduction to soil science, and we'll have some also relevant things around soil health management for growers. And then the last thing I'd say is the Soil Health Institute. They've been bringing together a lot of really good resources as well. They haven't done as much work in California quite yet, but they are moving their way in and have done some sampling at some of the long-term sites there. So yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. We need more though. We need more folks out there communicating on the impacts of management on soil health, and that's starting to grow, but it's definitely a field that needs more passionate people involved.
Your work is so important in kind of where ag is now and where we want to take it. So thank you so much for coming on and talking about soil, carbon, and microbes. And I'm definitely going to be following Instagram and Facebook, That Soil Life, and say it again.
So on Instagram, it's at soil.life. And then on Facebook, it's at the Soil Life.
At the Soil Life. Okay. So yeah. So
and eventually there will be a website, soillife.org, but we're not live yet. We're still beta.
All right. And then is there anything else that you would like to leave us with?
I guess just that, we're just scratching the surface of the soil microcosmos. We've just uncovered the tip of the iceberg. We know probably 1 to 5% of the microbes. Like as far as like identification, we've identified only 1 to 5%. So it's this huge black box of discovery. If you're a young person looking for a novel field to get involved in, where you can also be making a really positive impact, helping growers in the field, helping make better quality, more secure food systems, that is a really interesting new area to explore. And we're always learning new things, about the role of microbes in how soils function and how ecosystems function. And there's just, yeah, I think I hope one day someone makes a book like Everything I Need to Know About Life I've Learned from Soil Microbes, because when you think about like the importance of diversity in the soil community, for instance, those sorts of themes really scale to a societal level, because the more diversity you have in your soil microbial community, the more resilience you build in the system. And I think that same thing stands true of people and communities. So, and thank you for the work you all are doing as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so
much.
All right.